Hackers, welcome to the C.S. Joseph Podcast, Premium Edition. Today we're talking about the 4 Octagram variants of the ISTJ, which is Season 32, Episode 9. Thanks for watching. Thank you for being paid members of the Journeyman membership. That's been pretty awesome. It's been pretty great to have you all here. And definitely looking forward to continuing on with this premium lecture series. And we're going to be doing a new lecture series after this one where we are going to be discussing the concept of the demonic parent of each of the 16 types. I'm looking forward to that, and very much so. So, yeah, the ISTJ. And today, sadly, I don't have my other phone, so I've got some paper notes here, and then throw in some anecdotes, and we'll make this actually work. Probably going to be doing like some kind of paper system in the future. You need to get a clipboard, you know what I'm saying? So, what is the octagram? Octagram is the interpretation of how nurture impacts our nature. There are 4 paths to nurtural development. Whereas the Enneagram may try to combine nurture and with a bit of nature, the octagram is pure nature separated from nurture, while demonstrating how nurture shapes the expression of our nature. The octagram reveals 4 nuanced expressions of each type. Octagram is also our version of subtypes and details why each subtype, or variant, expresses themselves differently. This is important. The reason why it's important is that because a lot of us within the Ego Hacker community are actually familiar with the work of Dave Powers and Objective Personality System. He talks about there being subtypes on a regular basis from a psychological perspective. And yes, there is, but the difference is that while there is so many combinations to that end, there's also a lot more to consider, basically. And really that is basically nurture in its own right. Dave Powers, from his perspective, just keeps going on and on with nature because from his perspective, it's like, hey, any one person can have any one perspective of each of the cognitive functions, which creates up to 512 different subtypes. Well, while that makes logical sense, I have to disagree with that because that can only be sustained for a short amount of time, and even in some cases, depending on some cognitive functions, it can only be sustained for like a split second, right? Just a split second. So does that mean their nature has changed? Does that mean they're actually a different personality type? No, it doesn't. And that's like one of the biggest differences. When it comes to the octagram, like, it is our nurture. And nurture is based on how we as human beings have been nurtured, right? Well, how are we nurtured? Through a system called soft locking. The Cutting Edge December 2022 episode talks about soft locking. Please watch that. Soft locking is important to understand from the perspective of how octagram actually comes about. It's also a nice prerequisite episode to get knowledge, get informed on, especially from the perspective of getting to a point where, like, ego hacking by text as a course, like it's a prerequisite for that course. In order for you to understand it, get to the point of understanding it, I recommend you also watch soft locking. But soft locking is basically the following. Cognitive functions are looking for, compatibility or camaraderie. But from a compatibility perspective, especially when it comes to receiving your nurture from, your parental units, your parents, right? When you're at this perspective, it ends up becoming an issue, like with my own family. My dad had extroverted feeling hero. He had to look for an optimistic function. And the optimistic function was my introverted feeling trickster down in my shadow, so it forced me to cognitive transition to my INTJ side, and it developed neural pathways in my brain that made my brain more used to being into my INTJ shadow than into my ENTP ego, right? Whereas my mother, for example, her extroverted feeling parent was looking for a pessimistic form of introverted feeling, which would be my introverted feeling parent. So her FE parent would force my INTJ side to cognitive transition directly into my superego, and she would, quote, soft lock me into my superego, developing further neural pathways that kept me in my superego instead of actually, who I was within my ego, right? This is how my parental relationships actually disabled me as a person due to their functions basically drilling into me to just like naturally, and it created nurture. It actually shaped my brain. It shaped my mind. It shaped my neural pathways, basically, and that's what's happening to everyone. So please get educated on soft locking. I have some additional notes on soft locking here. So our environment forces us to prefer one side of the mind over the other. Our family, communities, and life experiences, we face pressure our brains through neuroplasticity to adapt to our environment, including like developing neural pathways, etc. Soft locking is the engine for octagram neutral development. Environment either enables or disables the expression of our ego. If you cannot express your ego fully in your environment, the pressure will lead you to the other sides of your mind. However, your psyche is always still trying to achieve its cognitive origin, even from a different side of the mind. And remember, we're talking about ISTJs here, so their cognitive origin, their main one is justification. Their second one is connectedness, also known as intimacy. It's very relevant to understand. We'll be talking about that shortly. Now, soft locking refines your ego, also known as ego enablement, or expands it, which is ego disablement, forcing expansion to the other sides of the mind. So like, for example, I was disabled, so I had to expand into the other sides of my mind due to that being disabled as a child. And that's why I'm ultimately unconscious developed, right? We're talking about the different forms of cognitive development when it relates to the ISTJ in a few minutes. Soft locking is the result of your life circumstances pushing you along the path to enlightenment. So enlightenment, basically, we call it cognitive integration, but it's when all four sides of your mind, your ego, your subconscious, your unconscious, your superego, are integrated together, and you basically become this complete human being. It's like what Tyler Durden said in that movie Fight Club, talking about aiming to not be complete, right? Why are human beings so focused on, personal growth or development? Well, it's because we're trying to reach cognitive integration. Naturally, this is what our brains are trying to do. That's just what happens. Now, he's doing it from a perspective of materialism. He's making the argument from the perspective of materialism, this fictional character, which is fine. But I'm not making it from the perspective of materialism. I'm making it from the perspective of you as a person, your identity, shaping your soul, shaping your identity, becoming the best version of yourself without the material. It's one of the reasons why I'm so modest. It does not take very much for me to be content. I really don't like owning things or having a wide variety of possessions. In fact, I'm trying to get rid of my possessions as much as I can. Too many possessions just absolutely just destroys me. And I really, really want to be modest. I want to be more modest, and I like it when people help me become more modest over time. I also like helping other people be modest as well, and I should probably be spending a lot more time doing that. Let's be honest. So, back to cognitive origin. ISTJs are seeking justification to justify themselves and determine if others are justified too. They look for the reasons or rationale to qualify justification for self and others and determine whether wrath or absolution is necessary. So, what does that mean? ISTJs are living life trying to figure out what they can get away with, what they are justified to get away with, what they are allowed to do, what other people are allowed to do, what other people are justified to get away with. It's all about seeing what that anyone or what they themselves can do to get away with something, basically. Which rules can be broken when, and by who? Who, what, where, when, how, why, when it comes to the rules, right? Who is justified to break a rule when in certain situations, and they understand that rules are all very situational, right? That's kind of how they live their life. That's why they keep track of everything. No one keeps track of more things than an ISTJ. Constantly keeping track. All the time. Constantly. And by keeping track, it ends up being this huge thing, over and over and over. Yes, hello? And all they do, ISTJ wants to feel that they are justified. They want to know what they can get away with. Paradigm shifts such as moving out of your house, taking a new lover, changing careers or jobs, having a child, or starting over in a new city often forces paradigm shifts in your psyche, changing cognitive focus. Okay? Cognitive focus is far more variable, whereas cognitive development is far more static. Childhood determines cognitive development, and adolescence determines your first cognitive focus. As you age and circumstances change, your cognitive focus changes with it. Now, we have often said that cognitive development is something that just doesn't change. And yes, it is still static, but being that it's still a part of nurture, fundamentally, it's still technically a little variable, okay? Still technically variable. And with it being variable, okay, that can be a thing. That can be a bad thing, really. So with it being variable, it's like, okay, how often can it change? Cognitive focus can change on a daily basis. It can actually change multiple times a day, depending on who you're around or who you're with, etc., right? So oftentimes, like, when I'm not really around my family, I'm kind of more UDSF. When I am around my family, I'm more UDUF, you know, because it's like they put me in this survival mode because they're soft locking me into these places, which is not really appropriate, which sucks. I mean, that's just the name of the game. That's just how it works, right? So based on that, what do we do? You know, how does that actually matter? How does it go even further, especially when it comes to the ISTJ? So what ends up happening is that you have these 4 octagram expressions. And unconscious development, it can change. It can, but only under some severe trauma. There's actually a guy who just works just straight down here. He had brain surgery. Completely different development. It's like his whole life has been entirely reset, right? And being able to, you know, deal with him and talk to him and communicate with him and get to know him, that's just kind of what has happened over time. And then I'm able to actually, you know, have that interaction with him and just kind of see, you know, who he was before and who he was after in terms of brain surgery. And he's just a completely different human being, especially nurturally speaking. So his cognitive development was basically reset. So it's way more malleable than it was before. So you start out really malleable, even from a cognitive development perspective, and then it slowly shifts over time. So let's talk about the 4 variants of ISTJ. So first one is SDSF, subconscious developed, subconscious focused, right? Also known as impartiality plus, what is the other one? Absolution, impartiality and absolution. And the theme is, I'm the man for the job, right? So SDSF, ISTJs are hyperdeveloped in their ENFP subconscious, where they've learned to lead with their desirability and adaptability. These people are insanely adaptable, using their ENFP subconscious to be able to increase their malleability and their adaptability over time. Which is pretty amazing if you think about it. They're so confident that their strength is meaningful. They believe that others will respond positively to the ISTJ's willingness to step up to any problem and fill any role. They're the man for the job. Their confidence in their own desirability emerges from childhood environments that rewarded the ISTJ's effort. Subconscious developed, subconscious focused ISTJs tend towards an attitude of self-assurance, not only that they are desirable, but are perhaps the most desirable. Which, honestly, quite frankly, it's true. You know, if they can literally, you know, if they're the man for the job and can take on any role, that's highly desirable in almost any situation. SDSF ISTJs tend to shovel out their effort as if it had an endless supply. Need some effort? I'm the man for the job. But they can also be entitled to their own comfort, sometimes putting in no effort due to their belief that their desirability justifies their prolonged relaxation, which is absolutely true. Sometimes they just need to chill and take a load off. And it's like, well, yeah, I kind of deserve to do this because I am this huge workhorse that can get through anything because I can take on any role at any time. And it's like, okay, then they decide to somewhat rest on their laurels as STJs do, right? SDSF ISTJs need to learn that their respect and authority is increased when they become more discerning about what and who they give their attention and effort, or which role they take on. I mean, oftentimes I've noticed, like, even SDSF ISTJs, like, getting involved, you know, for example, like men as, you know, for example, a Chippendales stripper, basically. ISTJ men are very, very involved as strippers and most likely to be strippers in those moments, which is really fascinating if you think about it. Really fascinating. Because, you know, they could take on any role. A more holistic strength exists beyond being a yes man. Deep down, their yes man attitude, when they neglect their choice, only makes them weaker. As much as they think that they're strong because they could take on any role, being that yes man actually inhibits their strength. Because then they overload themselves. And then when they decide that they need to relax and chill, then they become even more overloaded, and it creates this really negative cycle, basically, which makes them come off like super mega entitled. So the INI demon of the ISTJ will hate you so long as yes is your only answer. Just because someone wants you to do something doesn't mean you have to do it. Doesn't mean it's your duty to do it, right? You got to learn how to say no, because this can be really unhealthy behavior for SDSF ISTJs. And they became this way because they were entirely enabled as a child, but then they're also enabled in their adulthood. And they make sure that there are people in their life that do enable them to that end, because they have an expectation towards enablement. They have that expectation. And anyone that gets down on their joy, because SDSF is joy energy, basically. It comes from Strauss and Howe theory, as pointed out by Lane, also known as Elliot Woodhead. You got to give him credit where it's due. But the reality of the situation is that they have a lot of joy in their life, and they're always trying to keep up that joyful vibe. And if they don't have that joyful vibe, well, guess what? Guess what's going to happen? Then they're going to cut people out or not allow people that, hamper that vibe, because that's how they get uncomfortable. These ISTJs are uncomfortable by anyone that's not enabling their joy, basically, in their life, which can actually inhibit their growth. So their growth basically is determined by how many roles they can take on with this I'm the man for the job perspective and point of view. And that can absolutely be an issue. So watch out for that. All right, so then we have the SDUF ISTJ. SDUF people are about decay energy, right? They're the ones who were enabled as a child, but then in their adulthood, they realize that they're just being disabled in their adulthood, and they find themselves actually inherently immature. Whereas the immaturity within the SDSF ISTJ was entirely enabled throughout their life, and they actually have the expectation of it being enabled. The SDUF is like, no, that enablement actually is a weakness. SDUF ISTJs recognize that enable as a potential weakness, and so they're really trying to gain more wisdom so that they can actually do better in their life, because the support structure that they had as a child is just no longer there for them in their adulthood, which means they have to learn how to think on their feet. They have to learn how to deal with the fact that life is ultimately disabling. And so they end up having this decay energy about them, where they're literally testing everything in life, trying to see what's worth it, what's not, and see if they can use that to bring them back closer to their childhood, because they are very nostalgic towards their childhood, such as the way of an SDUF Octagram variant, right? So SDUF ISTJs, they have basically it's impartiality versus wrath. Impartiality meaning that they give everyone a fair shake, but at the same time, they can be very externally wrathful. These people kind of blame other people. It's like they see a rich person, and they'll blame that rich person for taking advantage of somebody else. They will discriminate, basically, to a point. But it's more like they'll just blame. It's like, oh, did that guy actually get rich on his own? Did he actually work hard? Oh, he probably didn't, right? Because they're projecting their SDUF decay attitude onto those people, right? And the theme of the SDUF ISTJ is, who am I separate from my roles? I was the man for the job. I used to be the man for the job. And the SDUF ISTJ is also notorious for self-medicating, because they're kind of depressed. They're depressed that, that there has been, like that one song, God, I forgot the name of the song. It talks about how this guy used to be a king, and now he's living on the street, and he's got nothing left going for him. And he's kind of pseudo giving up, and he keeps trying to get back to his kingdom, trying to get back to being the king, which is sad, but understandable, entirely understandable. I mean, I've been there. I know what that's all about. So SDUF ISTJs developed into their ENFP subconscious in childhood, and perhaps continued in their adolescence and even adulthood, but were eventually confronted with their own immaturity and their over-reliance on effort. They realize that they can actually put their effort in the wrong place, and that ultimately does bother them in some capacity. SDUF types in general, and especially ISTJ, tend toward a crisis of identity. They are really just going back and forth to figure out and constantly redefining who they are, because they can't go back to who they were in their childhood. So they have to keep redefining. And redefining is basically everything. So they're constantly on the search to find that one thing that actually confirms their identity, or discovering what their identity actually is, right? The SDUF ISTJ used to be the man for the job. They used to be desired by dishing out their effort and obligating themselves to numerous tasks and roles, but now they are no longer the man for the job. The identity they thought they had is ultimately shattered. And what a painful position to be in, especially a member type of the Soul Temple, which has the God function of introverted feeling, which is all about identity, that makes it very difficult, right? And based on your identity, that will qualify you through extroverted thinking demigod function, basically. It will qualify you as to whether or not what you can get away with, right? That's why they like to have relationships with people in the mind temple, camaraderie or compatibility based, it doesn't matter, because they're trying to see if they can actually become an authority and where they are qualified based on their character, right? And that's where that ends up happening, okay? So in the wake of their lost identity, they realize how weak they really are. Without being obligated to others, they don't possess the strength to stand alone, yet. SDUF ISTJs need to cultivate the skills for independence and learn to lead with their performance, but that exposes their weak places not only to others but to themselves and their ESTP shadow. They're like basically forced to look at themselves in the mirror all the time, and they're confronted with their flaws, and they're on this journey to fix or improve those flaws and turn those flaws into strengths, essentially. Their emerging strength will teach the ISTJ that when they have true strength, the strength to stand together and or alone, they can fill any role, even learn to make their own roles. So instead of taking on pre-existing roles, like the SDSF ISTJ does, they actually end up cultivating and creating entirely new roles. It allows them to be creative. So their ESTP shadow becomes their cognitive focus, and they use their ESTP shadow to create entirely new roles, right? Roles that never existed before, which is absolutely fascinating and one of the best traits of an SDUF ISTJ. It's pretty awesome, creating new roles. I think that's bloody brilliant, and I'm glad that these people exist to be able to define that and bring that moving forward. So the concept of I'm the man for the job is still a possibility for these types, but only when they learn how to create their own jobs and fill the roles that they would be willingly be able to choose for themselves. Because these SDUF ISTJs, they're not as risk averse. They don't always play it safe, which actually can be something in of its own right that makes them desirable as they choose these roles or cultivate these roles in their life. All right. Now let's talk about UDSF ISTJs, which is the energy of hope. And statistically, a UDSF, unconscious developed, subconscious focused ISTJ, statistically, any type that is UDSF is actually psychologically, more statistically, going to be successful in life, right? That's where it comes from. That's what it's all about. And that's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome that these people exist. These are the trailblazers of the 4 Octagram variants, right? The 4 trailblazers. And just to go back to like SUF again, remember, like if you are unconscious focused, I mean, before we just said it was UDUF as like a temporary mind state, but we realized recently that the mind is always trying to get to subconscious focus in any way, shape, or form, ultimately for personal growth. So if a person is unconscious focused, eventually they're kind of on this journey to get back to subconscious focus or to get to subconscious focus at all, right? Because that's ultimately where the brain is comfortable the most. That's where the brain is going to be happiness, and everyone has their own pursuit of happiness. If they're unconscious focused, they're really struggling from that pursuit of happiness point of view. And it ends up being a big problem or a big issue over time. But it's a good issue to have, because once you are able to gain the catharsis in your life to get to a point where you're no longer unconscious focused and starting to become subconscious focused, well, guess what? You're going to be a lot happier, way happier. So the UDSF ISTJ, also known as discrimination plus absolution, which is adversity has revealed to me what is most important. So these types are, in my opinion, the UDSF, because remember, ISTJs are philosopher types. They want to create that philosopher's stone, that I win button, basically. If I follow this one procedure or this one process, I'm guaranteed to get a favorable outcome, because they're trying to find the principles behind success. And I think out of the ISTJ 4 variants of the Octagram, UDSF ones are the ones who are able to cultivate that the most out of everybody. And being able to do that, I think is absolutely, it's a good thing, it's a necessary thing, no matter what happens, right? So adversity has revealed to me what is important. UDSF ISTJs were forced into their ESTP shadow growing up, where they lead with their performance and independence. Passion was created through testing their strength. UDSF types are graduates of the School of Hard Knocks. They use their ESTP shadow to create tribes so that they are always wanted, right? They persevered in their childhood and found hope in their adulthood. So they live their lives from the perspective that endurance will always lead to hope, which is absolutely fantastic. There's actually a scripture in the Bible that talks about this. It's in Romans chapter 5, verses 3 and 5. And it echoes the UDSF ISTJ's perspective. Quote, "And not only this, but we also celebrate in our tribulations, knowing that tribulation brings about perseverance, and perseverance, proven character, and proven character, hope." UDSF ISTJs seek to be refined over and over again. They're kind of like this glutton for punishment, but only because they realize that there are rewards behind that punishment. There are rewards behind refining their strengths over time. Discrimination is the result of the ISTJ's maturity that grew from the obstacles they overcame. So for unconscious developed ISTJs, discrimination means favoring the principles that built up strength in others, but it also means showing favoritism to specific people in their life. So the people that are the closest to the unconscious developed ISTJ are the ones who get the special treatment. Unconscious developed ISTJs really have a core principle around family. So Vin Diesel himself is an ISTJ, but his portrayal of Dominic Toretto in the Fast and Furious movies, and apparently the 10th film is in theaters right now, God bless him, he's always talking about family. He's always talking about his affiliates. He's always discriminating or showing favoritism towards his family, towards who he considers his family, the family you choose versus the family you inherit. He's always protecting family. He's always cultivating family. He's always leading family, or who he perceives or who he judges as family, such as the way of a UDSF ISTJ. And Dominic Toretto, as a fictional character, absolutely embodies that, which is pretty fascinating. So as a result, UDSF ISTJs are often preferential to others who have faced adversity over those who have not, especially those that they consider as members of their family, basically, their closest affiliates. They have more forgiveness to offer those who have faced continual obstacles and have been underprivileged. UDSF ISTJs should realize that their desirability comes both from their independence, which is their ability to fend for themselves and their ability to make themselves comfortable in any situation, which is, in my opinion, brilliant. I'm kind of envious of that, how they can literally have very little and be very comfortable with very little. I wish, I do that personally, but not at their ability, not at their level. At their level, I think that's absolutely incredible that they're able to do that. So their ability to fend for themselves, and because who they choose to advocate for and invest in has high value. These are the quality over quantity people. It's so important to them based on who they actually invest in, right? It means everything. UDSF ISTJs have higher standards for justification, and thus the way they justify will be regarded highly in the eyes of most. Oftentimes I make fun of ISTJs being walking excuse engines, where they make excuses for other people's, but they mostly spend their excuses on themselves. They expend their justification on themselves, and the ISTJ's job is to be that source of justification, that source of absolution, a source of forgiveness for people in their life. But oftentimes they spend that forgiveness on themselves selfishly. Well, the UDSF people, because they're very, they have that hope energy, they go out of their way to basically give hope through the form of forgiveness and letting people off the hook. Because from their perspective, it's like, hey, I was left off the hook here, here, and here, so you can be left off the hook as well, which is absolutely insanely powerful. And so many people out there value it, especially Soul Temple, Templar types, ESTPs, and INFJs as a result. And here's the thing, though. They don't do that just for anyone. It's really just those people who are closest to them, and that's who they do it for. That's when it really matters. So UDUF ISTJs, which is the fourth variant, this is the despair variant. This is where there's despair energy. And that's discrimination plus wrath, where they're outwardly showing favoritism to other people, maybe spend some of that favoritism on themselves, but they're also very outwardly wrathful and not very forgiving towards other people, because they've just been disabled their entire life. They've been disabled in their childhood and also disabled in their adulthood. It leads to high amounts of depression as well as high amounts of hatred. And sometimes they often do not give other people the time of day. And it makes them really hyper independent. That's what UDUF is all about, is being hyper independent, because you as a UDUF variant have to learn all of the skills and knowledge quickly just to survive, and you have to do it on your own, right? Rough childhood means rough adulthood. And that's ultimately what a UDUF variant psychologically has to deal with, right? So survival itself becomes their justification, where, hey, I have the ultimate one-off excuse. Their I win button in life as a philosopher type basically is survival, where from their perspective, if it helps them survive, they're justified to do anything. They will do anything. That means potentially stealing or taking from other people. Who knows? But whatever, like, they're willing to do what it takes to survive at any moment. That is the UDUF ISTJ in a nutshell. So these ISTJs were disabled in childhood and continue to not find a space where their ego could be nurtured. In their early environments, it is unlikely there was enough desire for them at all, or no one cared about their feelings or cared about what they value, or, because oftentimes UDUF people, they sacrifice their introverted feeling, from an ISTJ perspective, they sacrifice their introverted feeling child to their superego in exchange for the superego's power for the sake of survival. Because it's like, hey, if I'm not a person of value, well, guess what? Then nobody has any value, because if I'm not value, then no one else has value. And if no one else has value, then guess what? I'm justified to take from anyone so that I could survive. And it's really sad. It's really sad that these people exist, because they've just been so beat down by life over time. So as a result of that, survival is their justification. Survival ends up becoming their grand excuse. Survival itself is the main reason. It is the I win button behind everything in their life. This is why UDUF ISTJs are consistently incarcerated, and it's really sad. So others probably were not attentive to this ISTJ's comfort or their safety, and they may have experienced terror and trauma surrounding their own safety. UDUF ISTJs learned that self-sufficiency was a way of life, developing independence and the strength to survive by standing alone. It was essential for this particular ISTJ to even have a future or have any type of comfort or safety in their life whatsoever. Their reliance on their INFJ superego makes them more sensitive to abandonment than other ISTJs, but they also have much more power in their NI demon. These people, for the sake of survival, are willing to take risks, regardless of the consequences. They're just willing to take the risks. Oftentimes, ISTJs are extremely risk averse, but this ISTJ is willing to do those baller moves, to take those risks. And wow, it's kind of like the Dodger in the Oliver Twist story, basically. And willing to do whatever it takes to get what they need. Or, the friends that Pinocchio makes at Pleasure Island, essentially. So their INFJ superego focuses on creating new legacies and achievements that will build up strength in others. UDUF ISTJs may invest a lot in building up others, but they may struggle to actually bond with those people, as the fear of relying on others still weighs heavily on UDUF ISTJs. They're just very mistrustful, because they end up getting stuck in the trap of attachment. And the INFJ superego is all about attachment. It's not really about bonds. So what they end up doing is having a one-way street of attachment with other people. So where it's like they just end up taking from other people and receiving from others without actually giving anything of value in return. It's kind of like a covert contract to a point. And this is where they're able to justify taking from others, justify these attachments where they're taking from others on a consistent basis without giving much back. It kind of makes them look like a wayfarer to a point. In some cases, a really beat down or potentially malevolent INTJ to a point. And they'll probably take the test, and most MBTI tests end up testing as an INTJ as a result of this, which can be really difficult and can help, and actually could inhibit their ability to actually understand their specific identity with who they are as people. So UDF ISTJs were likely not given the benefit of the doubt in their childhood and may have felt accused and gaslit, especially through their abuse of their inferior, always being told that they're not desirable, that they'll amount to nothing, and that they're not actually ever going to be someone who is wanted for anything. Not being able to be the man for the job. It's like the hyper opposite. You'll never be the man for the job. So they actually end up starting believing that concept as a result of the abuse in their life. They actually believe it. And that's the problem. Whereas the UDSF ISTJ does not believe that, which is really important and ultimately incredible if you actually think about it. So ultimately, it's the skills for survival and the ability to take on the roles that they want. That marks the independent streak of the UDUF ISTJ. Justification is about living to the next day. It is rarely about abstract ideals that have not been tested in blood and battle. For UDUF ISTJ, only the strong have the future. It's basically like this is the survival of the fittest variant, essentially. No one embodies survival of the fittest more than the ISTJ UDUF variant, which kind of can be really sad. And from their perspective, they work really hard to be hyper-independent, to be as fit as possible, because they realize that if they are not fit, not only from their perspective, not only would they be, feel unwanted by other people, but at the same time, if they're not strong enough, they're not fit enough, they know that just naturally the world will just deselect them, right? The world will just zero them out to the point where they actually have the expectation that they are going to be zeroed out by the world, which is really sad if you think about it. Because remember, ISTJs naturally are affiliative, and they want to be on a team. They want to have that acceptance. They want to be interdependent and be able to rely on other people, but also be the person that others can rely upon. The UDUF ISTJ never even got that chance, and it's really difficult for them. So from their perspective, it's survival of the fittest. It's a dog-eat-dog world, and they'll do anything to make sure that they are survival, even if it means doing evil, even if it means harming fellow human beings. Because, and this is why UDF ISTJs have severe anger problems. And they oftentimes end up in anger management because they're just trying hard to cope with the fact that they're placing survival and such that they really don't have the opportunity to thrive. And given that they are affiliative, unless they have close affiliates in their life that actually help promote thrival in their life, they're not really going to have the opportunity to meet that thrival. Instead, they just stay in survival mode the entire time and use their need for survival as their justification to do anything. This is why the UDF ISTJ is ultimately capable of anything, to the point where it could be actually really terrifying because of how they're capable of anything. It's really difficult, it's really painful. I mean, it just sucks. It just absolutely sucks. So, let's discuss social engineering and the Octagram. So, social engineering implications of the Octagram. If cognitive origin never changes, regardless of development focus, then giving them their origin through their desired poles is the best way to reach out to ISTJs, regardless of what their variant is. So, impartiality, also known as not showing favoritism, which is subconscious development, it's best met by respecting the ISTJ's penchant for focusing on the facts and being objective, even if obsessively, and coming to them for their opinion and guidance, especially when chosen over other people. However, discrimination, which is unconscious development, which is based on favoritism, and showing favor and doing favors for a select few people, the people that are closest to them, right? This pole is best met by exposing yourself to the ISTJ. Their ESTP shadow will find justification for you when you are open and transparent for them. That's the thing. And this is an area in my life that I need to work on personally, especially, when considering my relationship with Rachel. I need to be making sure that every time she exposes herself to me, every time she expresses her feminine, when she's expressing needs, emotions, desires, and problems and doing it permissively, I always need to make sure that I'm rewarding that with justification. I'm rewarding that with absolution, where I'm absolving her and giving her forgiveness and being forgiving. Honestly, as an ENTP, I just know the truth that, sometimes I can be a very unforgiving person. And it's really hard for her to be forgiving of others because I can be unforgiving. I have to learn how to be more forgiving towards her. And because that's the only way that she is going to be forgiving of other people. That's the only, because she needs to be able to mirror that forgiveness. And as I forgive others, then she will mirror that, and then she will be forgiving. It's so important. Those who show mercy need to be shown mercy, and I need to make sure that I am showing mercy to other people in the process and being that example to her as I lead her throughout her life, which is absolutely important. It's absolutely critical for her own personal growth as a person, as she works hard to get her identity as well as a member of the Soul Temple. And this is what the ISTJ actually brings to the table. That's why it's so absolutely important, especially given that she herself is a UDUF variant of the ESTP, and she also places survival above all. And with her ISTJ side of her mind also saying, hey, I'm justified to do anything if it means I survive. That includes like lying and saying anything, right? Well, I'm not blaming her for that, especially given her past. It's just who she is, and it's what she's had to do to survive. And as a result, I need to learn how to be more compassionate towards her and be more forgiving towards her as a result. So anyway, folks, that's it for this lecture, the 4 octagram variants of the ISTJ. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.